Have you ever wondered if your worship is truly pleasing to God? It's a question that many of us, at some point in our faith journey, have probably asked ourselves. We go to church, we sing the songs, we lift our hands, but is what we're doing actually connecting with the heart of God? What if I told you that some of the ways we've been taught to worship might not be what God is looking for at all? Today, we're going to dive deep into a topic that might feel a little uncomfortable, but is absolutely crucial for a genuine relationship with God. We'll explore 3 common worship practices that God actually doesn't want. Now, before we go any further, let me be very clear about my intention here. This isn't about attacking any specific church, denomination, or worship style. The goal is to bring clarity, to encourage all of us to examine our own hearts and practices through the lens of Scripture, so we can offer God the kind of worship He truly desires. We're all in this together, learning and growing. So, what is the foundation for all of this? Jesus himself gives us the answer in the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 23 and 24. He's speaking to the woman at the well, and he says, "But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." This passage is our roadmap. It gives us 2 essential ingredients for worship that pleases God, spirit, and truth. Worship in spirit means it comes from the deepest part of us, our heart, our inner being. It's sincere, genuine, and driven by our love for God. Worship in truth means it's aligned with who God has revealed himself to be in his word, the Bible. It's grounded in correct doctrine and a right understanding of God's character and commands. True worship isn't one or the other. It's both held in perfect balance. When one of these is missing, our worship can drift into a form that God doesn't desire. And that brings us to our first point, the worship practice that is driven purely by emotion. This is what I call emotion-driven worship. It's the pursuit of a spiritual high, a powerful emotional experience, an overwhelming feeling. We've all been in services where the music swells, the lights are just right, and you feel a rush of emotion. Those moments can be beautiful and can certainly be part of a genuine encounter with God. The danger arises when the feeling itself becomes the goal. We start chasing the experience rather than the one to whom the experience is supposed to point. Think about it. We might say things like, "Worship was amazing today. I really felt the Spirit move," or conversely, "I just didn't feel anything in worship today. It was kind of flat." When our assessment of worship is based solely on our emotional response, we've made a subtle but significant shift. We've made worship about us and how it makes us feel rather than about God and his worthiness. This approach is problematic because emotions are fickle, they come and go. If our worship is dependent on feeling a certain way, what happens on the days we feel tired, distracted, or heartbroken? Does that mean we can't worship God? Of course not. Worship is an act of the will, a declaration of God's worth, regardless of our emotional state. Worshipping in truth reminds us that God is worthy of our praise because of who he is unchanging, holy and sovereign, not because we feel a certain way in a particular moment. The truth of God's character is the anchor for our worship, keeping it steady even when the seas of our emotions are turbulent. We worship because he is God, period. So the first practice God doesn't want is worship that prioritizes our emotional experience over his eternal truth. Now let's move on to the second practice, which is just as common and equally misguided, performance worship. This happens when our primary motivation in worship is to gain the approval or admiration of other people. It's when the "what will they think of me?" question becomes louder than the "what does God think of my heart?" question. This can manifest in a few different ways. For those on the stage, the worship leaders, the musicians, the singers, the temptation can be to perform for the crowd. It becomes about hitting the right notes, looking passionate, and creating a flawless musical experience to impress the congregation. Rather than humbly leading them into the presence of God, the focus shifts from being a lead worshiper to being a performer. But this isn't just a temptation for those on stage. It can happen to every single one of us in the congregation. We might raise our hands not because our heart is overflowing with praise, but because it's what everyone else is doing and we want to fit in. We might close our eyes and try to look super spiritual, hoping the person next to us notices our deep devotion. We might sing loudly and passionately not to honor God, but to be seen as a good worshiper. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus warns sternly against practicing our righteousness before others to be seen by them. He talks about praying and giving in secret, where only our Father in heaven sees. The principle applies directly to worship. When our worship becomes a performance for a human audience, it ceases to be for our divine audience. God is looking at the heart. He knows the difference between a gesture that flows from genuine adoration and one that is calculated for human applause. Remember our key text: we must worship in spirit. Performance-based worship is the opposite of this. It's external, it's calculated, and it's self-conscious. True worship in spirit is unself-conscious. It's so focused on the glory and majesty of God that we forget about ourselves. We forget about who's watching. Our only audience is the audience of one. This is the kind of worship that pleases God, not a show for others, but an honest offering from a heart captivated by Him. This leads us to our third and final practice that God does and want: tradition-based worship. Now, this one requires careful distinction. Tradition itself is not a bad thing. Our faith is built on traditions passed down through generations: hymns, creeds, liturgies. These can be incredibly rich and meaningful ways to connect with God and the historic church. The problem arises when we honor the tradition more than the God the tradition is supposed to point to. It's when our worship becomes a mindless, rigid ritual that has lost its heart. We do things a certain way simply because that's the way we've always done it, without any thought, passion, or understanding behind the actions. Jesus confronted this exact issue with the religious leaders of his day. In Mark chapter 7, he quotes the prophet Isaiah saying, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." He then says directly to them, "You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men." This is a powerful warning. It's possible to go through all the right motions, say all the right words, follow the liturgy perfectly, and have a heart that is a million miles away from God. Our worship can become an empty shell, a human tradition that we preserve, rather than a living, breathing encounter with the living God. This isn't an argument for throwing out all tradition. Not at all. It's a call to examine the why behind our traditions. Why do we sing this hymn? Why do we recite this creed? Why do we take communion this way? If the answer is just because we always have, we're in danger of honoring tradition over truth. True worship in spirit and truth infuses our traditions with life. It means we understand the truth behind the rituals, and we engage in them with a heart full of love for God. Whether you're in a high church service with ancient liturgy or a contemporary service with modern songs, the principle is the same. The form must never replace the Father. The ritual must never become more important than the relationship. So we have these three practices: emotion-driven worship, performance worship, and tradition-based worship. Each one, in its own way, represents a deviation from the biblical standard of worshiping in spirit and in truth. They are dangerous because they are subtle counterfeits. They look and feel like worship, but they replace genuine devotion with something else. Emotion-driven worship replaces God with our feelings. Performance worship replaces God with a human audience. And tradition-based worship replaces God with human customs. In each case, God is dethroned from the center of our worship. So what does true worship, the kind God is actively seeking, actually look like? It's not about a specific style of music or a particular type of building. True worship is a matter of the heart, posture, and focus. First, true worship is sincere. It flows from a genuine heart. It's honest. It's authentic. It means we can come to God as we are, happy, sad, broken, or joyful, and offer Him what we have. It's not about putting on a happy face when we're grieving. It's about bringing our grief to Him in worship. Sincerity is the essence of worshiping in spirit. Second, true worship is obedient. It's grounded in truth. It's not just about what we do for an hour on a Sunday morning. It's about how we live our lives Monday through Saturday. The Apostle Paul tells us in Romans 12:1 to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, and he calls this our true and proper worship. A life of obedience, seeking to honor God in our choices, our work, and our relationships is the highest form of worship. Our singing on Sunday is simply the overflow of a life lived in worship all week long. Third, true worship is humble. It recognizes the infinite gap between a holy God and sinful humanity. It's a posture of awe and reverence. The prophet Isaiah had a vision of God in the temple, and his immediate reaction was not, "Wow, what a cool experience." It was, "Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." That's the heart of worship, a profound sense of God's greatness and our smallness, which paradoxically is where we find our greatest joy and security. True worship dethrones us from the center of our own universe and rightly places God there. In the end, it all comes back to this simple, profound truth. God is not looking for perfect performers or emotional junkies or rigid traditionalists. He is looking for genuine hearts. He desires a real relationship with you and me. He wants us to come to Him honestly, grounded in the truth of who He is, with hearts overflowing with love for Him, not for the experience, not for the approval of others, and not for the sake of tradition. So I encourage you, the next time you are in a place of worship, whether it's in a church service, in your car, or on a walk in nature, take a moment to examine your heart. Ask yourself, am I here for a feeling? Am I conscious of who is watching me? Am I just going through the motions? Or is my heart and mind truly fixed on the majesty and beauty of God? Am I worshiping in spirit and in truth? That's the kind of worship that changes us. That's the kind of worship that honors Him. And that's the kind of worship the Father is seeking. Thank you so much for joining me for this important conversation today. If this message resonated with you or challenged you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What helps you worship in spirit and in truth? Let's encourage one another. And of course, if you found this helpful, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more content that helps us grow deeper in our faith. We'll see you in the next one.